Settle in, let your shoulders fall heavy, and let the room do what it does best at night. Stay still. Somewhere under a Victorian street, you are moving through brick tunnels that sweat quietly in the dark. You think the danger is the smell, sharp and rude, like old soap and rot mixed together. But the air has secrets you cannot see, and it keeps them without emotion. Tonight, with the Sleepless Scientist as your mildly tired guide, you will drift through sewer gas, coal fog, and the slow, polite chemistry of breathing. You will follow oxygen as it trades places in your lungs, and you will float with red blood cells doing their unglamorous night shift. Nothing here is urgent. Everything here is real. And the safest place to learn it is right where you are, warm and motionless and almost asleep. You take another step, and the brick under your boots slicks over like wet pottery. The ceiling is low enough to make you hunch, even if your pride refuses. Water clicks somewhere far ahead, not a stream, more like a slow leak counting time. The air is thick, not because it is heavy, but because it is crowded. It is crowded with methane, with hydrogen sulfide, with carbon dioxide, and with old human optimism. Victorian sewer gas was never one monster. It was a committee of small, invisible problems, voting on how your night should go. Methane is the quiet one. It does not sting your eyes or announce itself with drama. It just waits, and it burns, and it likes a nice enclosed tunnel. Hydrogen sulfide is the theatrical one. It smells like rotten eggs, like a breakfast that died for your sins. At low levels, it is a warning bell. At higher levels, it can numb your sense of smell, which is the universe's little joke. Your alarm system gets switched off mid-emergency. Carbon dioxide is the boring one and the most reliable. It does not smell like anything, and it does not care about your opinions. It is what collects when air stops circulating, when breathing happens, and fresh air does not. In a low tunnel, carbon dioxide can pool close to the floor, so if you crouch or if you trip, you get closer to the problem. Congratulations! The ground is not always your friend. You keep moving, and your lantern makes a small, nervous light. The flame is not just for seeing. It is a crude sensor, a small living indicator of whether the air can support fire. If the flame weakens, it means oxygen is low or something is smothering it. And if the flame flares strangely, it means there might be fuel in the air waiting to become an explosion. You are holding a physics experiment in your hand, and it is also your nightlight. The Victorian sewer gas tester did not have sleek instruments. They had bodies. They had lungs. They had headaches, nausea, and a deep dislike of surprises. Sometimes they had a canary, or a mouse, or some other small creature with faster consequences. Industry loved shortcuts, especially the kind with fur. A small animal breathes faster than you do. It has a higher metabolism and less reserve, so it shows symptoms sooner, like a preview of your own future. If the animal stops moving, you do not get a medal. You get a warning, and you try to act like you are not already too late. You step through shallow water that is not shallow for the things living in it. The surface has a scum that holds together like weak jelly. The smell rises when you disturb it because the gases trapped below get released. This is not one smell. It is a layered smell, like a bad neighborhood of chemicals. Some of it is decomposing organic matter. Some of it is soap and lye from washing. Some of it is industrial waste because the river was busy being used. In the 19th century, people argued about what made you sick. Many believed in miasma, the idea that bad air caused disease. They were wrong about the cause, but not wrong about the experience. Breathing a sewer did make you feel awful. It just was not the smell itself carrying cholera like a polite letter. Cholera was carried by water contaminated with the bacterium called Vibrio cholerae. That name sounds elegant, like it should wear a tiny hat. In human terms, it is a curved bacterium that can turn your intestines into a disaster zone. But down here, in the tunnel, you are not thinking about bacteria. You are thinking about oxygen. You are thinking about how your chest feels a little tight. You are thinking about how the tunnel air does not feel sharp. It feels stale. That is carbon dioxide creeping up and oxygen slipping away. Your body notices this in a way your mind does not always translate. You may feel a dull headache, a heavy fatigue, a vague irritation. You may feel like you are panicking for no reason. There is a reason. Your brain is a demanding tenant. It wants fresh oxygen all the time without negotiation. And it gets rude when the supply line falters. Hydrogen sulfide adds its own cruelty. It interferes with cellular respiration, the way your cells use oxygen. It can bind to enzymes involved in energy production. In plain language, it makes your cells worse at doing their job. In higher exposures, it can cause collapse, seizures, even death. And it can do it quickly, with very little warning. This is why sewer work could be deadly in a calm, ordinary way. No monsters, no screaming music, just a man going down to check a tunnel and not coming back up. And then another man going down to retrieve him, because humans are loyal like that. And then not coming back up either, because humans are also tragically consistent. You listen to the tunnel. It is not silent. It is full of drips, distant rushing, and the occasional scrape of something that knows the map better than you do. Sound travels oddly in these brick throats. Your lantern throws light that sticks to the wet walls. Every brick is sweating, and every joint is dark with slime. The Victorians built these sewers like cathedrals of drainage. Arches, careful brickwork, sometimes wide enough to walk in. And still, the job down here was not dignified. It was cold and wet and exhausting. You do not just walk. You climb over obstructions. You balance on narrow ledges. You step around sudden drops. You pull your boot out of suctioning mud that does not want to let go. Your hands brush the wall for balance and come away slick. Even the safe parts are work. The body does not like working in the cold. Your muscles burn faster and your grip slips. And if you are wearing heavy clothing, it gets soaked. Wet clothing steals heat patiently, like a tax collector. The tunnel air presses dampness into your hair and eyebrows. You taste it faintly metallic, faintly sour, and if you have been here long enough, you stop noticing the smell, not because it is gone, because your brain refuses to keep screaming. Olfactory fatigue is the technical term. In human terms, your nose gives up. It is a mercy with sharp edges, because smell was one of the few warnings you had. That is why the strongest odors mattered. Not because grossness is deadly on its own, but because strong odor often meant stagnant air, poor ventilation, more gas trapped and concentrated. A sharp stink could mean the tunnel is not breathing. And if the tunnel is not breathing, neither will you. You pause and hold the lantern lower. The flame flickers, nervous and thin. It is not out yet, but it is not happy. Somewhere above you, the city pretends to be civilized. Down here, the city is honest. It is pipes and waste and chemistry and gravity doing its blunt work. You think of the men who did this for wages, not as adventurers, but as laborers. They went home with wet socks and sore backs. They went home with headaches that did not quite leave. And sometimes they did not go home at all. A small slip, a small pocket of gas, a small moment of bad luck. Science is often presented as clean, white, and confident. But down here, science is a wet brick under your foot and a candle trying not to die. You take the long way around a deeper channel. The water there is darker, more still. Still water can hide anaerobic zones, places without oxygen. In those places, bacteria switch to other chemical pathways. They break down sulfur compounds and produce hydrogen sulfide. They ferment and generate methane. Microbes do not do this to be evil. They do it because they are alive, and life is improvisation. You are walking through the byproducts of microbial survival. The smell is their exhaust. The gas is their sigh. And your lungs are not built for it. You reach a junction, and the tunnel splits. One direction has a faint draft. The other direction is still. Like a sealed closet, the draft is more than comfort. It is a promise of oxygen. Ventilation matters because gases dilute when fresh air moves through. Without airflow, heavier gases can collect and linger. The Victorians learned this the hard way in reports written after funerals. They eventually improved sewer design with better ventilation shafts. They added traps, better gradients, more consistent flow. But in the early years, much of it was guesswork. And in the meantime, a man with a lantern and a nose was the quality control department. You follow the draft. It cools your face a little cleaner, a little less sour. Your lantern steadies, as if relieved. Your chest feels less tight, and your thoughts stop wobbling. It is amazing how quickly your mind forgives danger when danger backs off. That is one of the brain's less admirable talents. It forgets pain fast enough to keep you alive. It forgets risk fast enough to make you repeat it. You keep walking until the tunnel slopes upward. The bricks change, newer repairs interrupting older workmanship. You find a ladder, iron rungs slick with damp. You climb, and the air changes with every rung. Less rot, more soot, less damp stone, more street dust. And when you finally push up into the night, you do not step into clean air. You step into a different flavor of problem. The city above has its own atmosphere, still dirty, just dressed in better clothes. The fog wraps around the street lamps like stained gauze. You can see the light, but it does not travel far. It just glows and gives up. Victorian pea soup fog was not just weather. It was fog plus smoke, a partnership of water droplets and coal soot. Coal smoke carries tiny particles, black carbon, ash, and acidic compounds. When those particles mix with natural fog, the droplets become a delivery system. They hold grime in suspension and paint it onto everything. Your coat, your eyelashes, the stone of buildings, the inside of lungs. You walk through it and your mouth tastes faintly bitter, like licking a cold fireplace. Your throat has a slight burn, a dry scrape that suggests inflammation. The soot settles on windowsills, on curtains, on teacups. It is an unwanted seasoning added to every meal by the air itself. If you wipe your finger along a ledge, it comes away dark. That darkness is not just dirt. It is unburned carbon, and it is small enough to be inhaled. Fine particulate matter can travel deep into the respiratory tract. It can irritate airways, worsen asthma, and increase risk of heart and lung disease. The Victorians did not have that phrasing. They had coughing. They had wheezing. They had the sound of a city breathing badly. Gas lamps glow along the street, a warm light with a dirty secret. Those lamps burn fuel, and burning produces heat and fumes. The light is comforting, but it is not free. Inside shops and homes, gas lighting could add nitrogen oxides and other combustion byproducts. You get light, and you get indoor air pollution. As a bonus feature, congratulations, your evening ambiance comes with a sore throat. People learned to read the air with their bodies. They could taste when the fog was thick with smoke. They could feel it in the sting of their eyes. They could tell when laundry would come back inside smelling like the street. The weather report was delivered directly to your face. And public health changes, like cleaner fuels and better regulations, came slowly, not because the science was impossible, because societies argue until the coughing gets loud enough. It is a deeply human pattern. First, denial, then debate, then committee meetings, then, at last, a law. And somewhere in between, people adapt. They hang heavier curtains. They clean more often. They accept that winter means darkened skies at noon. They accept that children will cough. You stand in the fog and watch it move. It curls around carriage wheels and disappears under doors. It makes every street feel like a hallway in an old building. The city becomes smaller, not by distance, but by visibility. And this is the strange intimacy of dirty air. It is shared. Everyone breathes it, rich and poor, though the poor usually breathe more of it because they live closer to factories, closer to soot, closer to the ground. Air is democratic in principle and unequal in practice. Speaking of breathing things you did not agree to breathe, you can shrink now, quietly. You can follow the air into the body, one unremarkable breath at a time. You are no longer on the street. You are at the edge of a nostril, riding an invisible current. Air feels empty, but it is packed with molecules, moving fast, bumping, and trading places. Most of what you inhale is nitrogen, which mostly watches and does not participate. Oxygen is a smaller portion, but it is the one your cells are addicted to. There are also traces, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and whatever the city added. Your nose takes that outside air and tries to civilize it. It warms it because cold air shocks delicate tissue. It humidifies it because dry air cracks and irritates. The nasal passages are lined with mucous membranes, wet surfaces that trap particles. Tiny hairs called cilia Move that mucus along, slowly, like a conveyor belt. In human terms, your nose is a careful doorman. It tries to take your coat, wipe your shoes, and stop you tracking soot inside, but it cannot catch everything. So the air continues, down past the throat. The epiglottis stands guard, a small flap that keeps food from falling into the windpipe. Most days, it does its job without applause. When it fails, you cough and remember it exists. You travel down the trachea, a firm tube held open by rings of cartilage. The rings are not complete circles. They are shaped like open horseshoes, leaving space for the esophagus behind. Even your anatomy is a compromise between breathing and swallowing. The trachea branches into bronchi right and left, then into smaller bronchioles, like a tree turned upside down, roots reaching into your chest. At the ends are alveoli, tiny air sacs, clustered like grapes. Their walls are thin, because the whole point is exchange. Oxygen does not need an invitation. It just drifts through the thin, wet wall because gases are like that, impatient and unromantic. Oxygen moves from where it is crowded in the alveolus to where it is scarce in the blood. Carbon dioxide does the opposite trip, leaving the blood like a quiet exit. No fireworks happen here. It is more like two lines at a counter, exchanging parcels without eye contact. You press closer to the alveolar wall and you notice how fragile it is. One cell layer, a thin film of moisture, and then a capillary. A capillary is a blood vessel so narrow, red cells have to squeeze. This thinness is the entire point. Thick walls would protect you, but they would also starve you. So evolution chooses efficiency and calls it beauty. The air in the alveolus is warm and wet. It smells like nothing because healthy lungs are not supposed to advertise themselves. If they smell sweet or sour or metallic, that is usually a story you would rather not hear. The surface of the alveolus is coated in surfactant. Surfactant is a slippery chemical that lowers surface tension. In human terms, it stops your tiny air sacs from sticking shut like damp plastic wrap. Without surfactant, breathing becomes a fight. Each inhale prying open collapsed tissue. Newborns sometimes struggle with this because surfactant production ramps up late in pregnancy. Nature waits until the last minute because nature is a chronic procrastinator. Now the oxygen has crossed into the blood, and it meets the real workers. Red blood cells drift past like soft discs, flexible and busy. They look simple, almost lazy, but they are specialized to an extreme. They have no nucleus, no DNA library, no long-term memory, no plans for the future. They give up their ability to divide just to make more room for hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein built to hold oxygen without holding it too tightly. It is the perfect kind of relationship for survival, committed but not clingy. At the center of hemoglobin sits iron, an old, stubborn metal. Iron binds oxygen, and that bond changes the shape of the protein. This is why oxygen loading is cooperative. When one oxygen binds, the next ones bind more easily. In human terms, hemoglobin is a bus that becomes more welcoming as it fills up. You might expect oxygen to dissolve directly into blood like sugar in tea. A little does, but not enough. Oxygen is not very soluble in water, and your blood is mostly water. So you need hemoglobin, a fleet of molecular seats, to carry it efficiently. Without hemoglobin, you would need an absurd amount of blood flow to deliver enough oxygen. Your heart would have to work like a machine that never sleeps. Congratulations, you would be a hummingbird without the charm. In the capillary, the red cell deforms. It folds slightly, then slides along the vessel wall. Capillaries are so small that red cells travel single file. This is less like a river and more like a narrow hallway in a crowded building. The red cell moves because the heart pushes and because pressure gradients do not negotiate. The heart is not poetic. It is a pump made of muscle, opening and closing valves like doors that cannot afford to stick. You could almost hear it from here, a dull, rhythmic thump through layers of tissue. If you listen closely, there is also the softer sound between beats, blood swishing. It is not silence inside a body. It is plumbing, always moving, always slightly wet. The oxygen stays on hemoglobin until it reaches tissues that are hungry. Hungry tissues have lower oxygen pressure and more carbon dioxide. The local chemistry changes the hemoglobin's grip. This is called the Bohr effect, named for Niels Bohr, who had other hobbies too. In human terms, it means busy, acidic tissues make hemoglobin let go more easily. Your muscles do not politely request oxygen. They change the environment until oxygen falls off the truck. Carbon dioxide, meanwhile, is trying to get out. Some of it rides back, dissolved in plasma. Some of it binds directly to hemoglobin at different sites than oxygen. Most of it gets converted into bicarbonate, a chemical form that travels well in water. This conversion happens inside red cells, helped by an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. It is fast because your body does not enjoy delays. The bicarbonate then swaps places with chloride in the blood plasma. This is called the chloride shift, and it keeps charges balanced. In human terms, your blood does quiet accounting all day, so you do not explode. Now, follow the red cell as it leaves the lungs. It is brighter now because oxygenated hemoglobin reflects light differently. That bright red is arterial blood, the kind you keep on the inside. It moves into larger vessels and the speed increases. The walls of arteries are thick and elastic, built to handle pressure. Each heartbeat stretches them. Then they recoil. That recoil smooths the flow between beats, like a springy hose. This is why your pulse exists. You are feeling pressure waves, not individual red cells knocking. The red cell glides through branching highways. The aorta, then smaller arteries, then arterioles. Arterioles are the control knobs, tightening and relaxing to direct flow. When you are cold, skin vessels constrict, hoarding heat for the core. When you are hot, they open, letting heat leak out. It is not elegant. It is survival with sweat. If you are anxious, stress hormones tighten some vessels. Blood gets diverted toward muscles because your body still thinks you might need to run. It does not care that you're just lying still, thinking about tomorrow. Your ancient chemistry cannot read calendars. It only reads threat, and it is not a careful reader. The red cell enters a capillary bed in muscle tissue. The passage narrows, and the red cell bends again. Here, oxygen begins to peel away, one molecule at a time. It crosses into cells that are burning fuel. The fuel is often glucose, sometimes fatty acids, depending on the tissue and the moment. Inside the cell, oxygen is taken to mitochondria. Mitochondria are the small power stations that turn food into usable energy. They use oxygen as the final electron acceptor in a chain of reactions. In human terms, oxygen is the last handoff in a relay race that ends in energy. When that handoff fails, the cell panics. It switches to less efficient pathways, making lactic acid and small concessions. If the oxygen shortage lasts, the cell cannot keep up. Then, damage begins. Quietly at first, this is why oxygen delivery is so carefully managed, not for heroism, but for maintenance. You do not feel most of this. That is part of the trick. A lot of your survival is silent until it becomes a problem. The red cell, now emptier of oxygen, picks up carbon dioxide. The tissue is warmer here. Warmer blood releases oxygen more easily, which is convenient. Again, the body is not poetic, just practical. The red cell drifts onward, carrying waste away. Waste is not evil. Waste is proof you are alive. Carbon dioxide is simply the exhaust of metabolism, like breath from a small furnace. If carbon dioxide builds up, the blood becomes more acidic. Your brainstem notices this more than it notices oxygen levels. That is a strange fact and very important. You think you breathe because you need oxygen, but most of the time, you breathe because you need to get rid of carbon dioxide. Congratulations. The urgency in your life is mostly about trash removal. The red cell passes through veins now. Veins are lower pressure vessels, thinner walled, with valves. Those valves prevent backflow, especially in the legs, because gravity is always applying for a job, and it never takes a day off. When you walk, your muscles squeeze veins and push blood upward. Movement is part of circulation. Stillness is restful, but it changes the plumbing. This is one reason long periods of immobility can be risky. Blood can pool, and clotting can become more likely. Your body is designed for motion, even if your mind prefers blankets. Now the blood returns to the right side of the heart. It enters the right atrium, then the right ventricle. The right ventricle sends it to the lungs, not with violence, but with persistence. Pulmonary circulation is shorter and lower pressure because lung capillaries are delicate. Then the blood returns to the left side of the heart, ready to be sent everywhere. 2 loops, over and over, while you do everything else, and while you do nothing at all. A heartbeat is a cycle of electrical timing and muscular squeeze. The electrical signal starts in the sinoatrial node. That is the natural pacemaker, a small cluster of cells that fires rhythmically. The signal spreads, the atria contract, then a delay, then the ventricles contract. It is a choreographed sequence, like doors opening in the right order. If the timing breaks, the pump loses efficiency. Sometimes it loses the plot entirely. But most nights, it keeps a steady tempo. It is repetitive and it is comforting. The body's own train schedule. Victorian engineers understood pumps too. They built them big, loud, and leaky. Your heart is small, quiet, and also leaky in its own way. Every valve can wear, every vessel can stiffen. Nothing biological is permanent. It is only maintained. You might imagine blood as a clean red liquid, but up close, it is a crowded suspension. Red cells dominate. White cells are rarer larger and more opinionated. Platelets are tiny fragments ready to patch leaks. Plasma carries proteins, hormones, salts, glucose, and messages. It is a warm, salty sea with cargo everywhere. And it has a particular smell, metallic and animal, when it is exposed. It smells like iron and life, which are the same thing tonight. Now stay with the red cell a little longer. It is about to squeeze into a capillary so narrow, it must fold. This is where its flexibility matters. A healthy red cell is like a soft coin, biconcave, designed to bend. That shape increases surface area for gas exchange. It also lets the cell deform without breaking, most of the time. Some diseases change this. Sickle cell disease, for example, makes hemoglobin form stiff fibers under low oxygen. The red cell becomes crescent-shaped, rigid, and prone to clogging vessels. In human terms, the delivery trucks turn into broken furniture in a hallway. This causes pain crises, organ damage, and exhaustion. It is a single genetic change with a lifetime of consequences. But it also offers some protection against malaria in certain contexts. Evolution, again, is not kind. It is a bargain table, trading one misery for another. In a Victorian city, malaria was less common in London, more common in swampy regions. But the principle remains. Your biology carries old compromises signed by ancestors you never met. The red cell keeps moving. It will live for about 4 months, give or take. Then it will be removed, mostly by the spleen. The spleen is like a quality control office, filtering old or damaged cells. It is not sentimental. Macrophages there will eat worn-out red cells and recycle parts. Iron gets stored or reused. The heme pigment becomes bilirubin, processed by the liver, excreted in bile, which is a polite way of saying, yes, your poop has a color history. Nothing is wasted if it can be helped. Even decay is organized. Speaking of organized greed, there is an organ that demands oxygen like rent. Your brain. It is only a small fraction of your body weight, but it uses a large share of your energy, even at rest. It is a power-hungry device that never truly powers down. So, let the bloodstream carry you upward now, past the ribs, past the steady pump, into vessels that climb the neck. The carotid arteries are thick and direct. Blood flows fast here because the brain does not tolerate delays. Inside the skull, space is limited. The brain sits in cerebrospinal fluid, cushioned, but not floating free. The skull is a hard box, and swelling has consequences. So blood flow must be carefully balanced. Too little oxygen, and neurons fail quickly. Too much pressure, and vessels can rupture. It is a high-performance system inside a fragile container. Congratulations! You are carrying your most delicate equipment in a helmet you cannot remove. When you are awake, your brain is a loud committee. It argues, predicts, remembers, worries, and narrates. At night, it does not stop. It just changes shifts. It becomes a building switching to night staff. Lights dimmed, but hallways still active. Sleep comes in stages, cycling through patterns. In lighter sleep, you drift, and sounds can still pull you back. In deeper sleep, the body grows harder to wake, and muscles relax further. Then there is rapid eye movement sleep. The dream-heavy phase. Your eyes flick beneath lids as if watching something private. Your body is mostly paralyzed during this, called atonia. It is a safety feature, stopping you from acting out dreams, because dreams can be dramatic and furniture is unforgiving. Sleep is not one smooth plunge. It is waves. About every hour and a half, your brain cycles through these stages. The pattern changes across the night. More deep sleep early, more rapid eye movement later. If you wake near the wrong moment, you feel groggy. That is sleep inertia, the brain complaining about being dragged from deep water. Your brain runs on chemicals that rise and fall like tides. Adenosine builds up while you are awake, a pressure for sleep. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors. In human terms, caffeine is a small liar that tells your brain it is not tired yet. Melatonin rises when light fades, more a suggestion than a sedative. It tells the body night is here, adjust accordingly. The real architecture of sleep involves many regions. The hypothalamus helps regulate circadian rhythm. The brainstem helps manage arousal and breathing. The thalamus gates sensory input, turning down the outside world. The cortex shifts its patterns, less focused on external tasks. And through it all, the brain continues to process. Not like a computer, but like a restless animal. Dreams are part of that processing, though not always meaningful. They are the brain remixing memories, emotions, and fragments. Faces you recognize, hallways you do not, conversations that never happened. Dream logic feels convincing in the moment. That is because the prefrontal cortex, the skeptic, is less active during rapid eye movement sleep. Your inner fact checker clocks out. The improvisers take over. This is why you can accept absurdity in dreams with calm confidence. You are running from something in a building that is also your school, also a subway station, also a kitchen. And you think, yes, this makes sense. It makes perfect sense until you wake and feel mildly insulted. But dreams are not just entertainment. Sleep, especially deep sleep, is associated with memory consolidation. The hippocampus, involved in forming memories, replays patterns of activity. It is like reviewing notes quietly, without a spotlight. Some studies suggest this replay helps stabilize memories in the cortex. Not every detail, but the gist. Your brain keeps what seems useful and discards what does not. The decision of what is useful is not always flattering. It remembers embarrassment with enthusiasm and forgets names with ease. During sleep, the brain also manages housekeeping. There is a system sometimes called the glymphatic system. It involves fluid movement through brain tissue, helping clear metabolic waste. In plain terms, it is like rinsing a sponge. Waste products like beta amyloid can accumulate. Sleep appears to help reduce that buildup. This does not mean one good nap makes you immortal. It means chronic sleep loss is not free. Nothing in biology is free. Even your thoughts have a maintenance schedule. Your body temperature also shifts at night. It tends to drop slightly, helping sleep deepen. That is part of why a cool room often feels better for sleeping. Your muscles relax, your breathing becomes slower and more regular. Your heart rate often drops, though it can spike during dreams. If you have ever woken with a racing heart after a vivid dream, that is not mystery. It is your body responding to a story it wrote for itself. Congratulations! You scared yourself with homemade cinema. Your senses are not fully off during sleep. You still process sounds, especially meaningful ones. A baby crying, your name spoken, an alarm tone. The brain keeps a watchman on duty. It is selective security, ignoring most noise, but not all. This is why some people sleep through thunderstorms, but wake to a small, unfamiliar sound. The brain is less concerned with volume than with novelty. Novelty might mean danger, and danger is always invited to the night shift. While the brain cycles, hormones shift too. Growth hormone tends to be released during deep sleep. It supports tissue repair and metabolism. This is one reason sleep matters for recovery. Cortisol, a stress hormone, follows a daily rhythm. It is often lower at night, then rises toward morning. It helps you wake and mobilize energy. In a healthy rhythm, cortisol is like a scheduled alarm clock, not an emergency siren. But stress can smear this rhythm. Chronic stress keeps cortisol elevated, making sleep lighter, more fragmented. It is hard to rest when your chemistry insists the world is on fire, even when the only fire is a distant gas lamp on a Victorian street. As you lie still, your brain is also managing autonomic functions. Breathing continues without your permission. Heart rhythm adjusts to posture. And dream state, digestion slows but does not stop. The intestines continue gentle waves of movement, called peristalsis. It is the slow conveyor belt of your inner tunnel system. Like the sewers beneath the city, it moves things along quietly. And like those sewers, when flow stops, problems begin. Constipation is not romantic, but it is a lesson in plumbing. So is reflux, when stomach acid creeps upward. Gravity helps keep it down most of the time. Your body uses valves and angles and pressure differences. Again, compromise engineering. Now, return to your brain's night mode for a moment. Neurons communicate with electrical impulses and chemical synapses. They are not tiny wires. They are living cells with membranes maintaining ion gradients. That gradient is the entire trick: sodium on one side, potassium on the other, and a membrane that plays bouncer. When a neuron fires, it is not exploding with electricity. It is simply letting ions rush because gates opened at the wrong time. Voltage-gated channels is the proper term. Little proteins that change shape when charge changes. In human terms, they are doors that only open when the hallway gets loud enough. Sodium floods in first, fast and eager, making the inside less negative. That shift travels down the neuron like a rumor. Then potassium follows, leaving the cell, restoring the old balance with a tired sigh. The neuron spends energy afterward, using the sodium-potassium pump to reset the stage. It burns adenosine triphosphate, the cell's cache, to keep the gradient steep. Congratulations! Even thinking requires constant payments to a molecular landlord. At the end of the neuron, the signal does not jump as pure electricity. It becomes chemistry again, because biology likes mixed methods. The electrical change triggers vesicles, tiny bubbles, to release neurotransmitters into a synapse. A synapse is a gap so small it feels like a joke. Across that gap, molecules drift, bind to receptors, and open new ion channels. This is how one cell convinces another cell to do something, not by force, but by controlled bribery. Some neurotransmitters make the next neuron more likely to fire. Glutamate is a common excitatory one, a chemical nudge toward action. Some make it less likely to fire. Gamma-aminobutyric acid, usually called GABA, is a major inhibitory one, a chemical hand on the shoulder. In human terms, glutamate says, go. GABA says, maybe not, let's sit down. Sleep is not just the brain running out of energy. Sleep is the brain actively shifting balances, increasing inhibition, lowering arousal systems, changing network rhythms. You can picture the waking brain as a crowded street. At night, traffic lights change timing, and most shops close. The street is still there, but it behaves differently. Some of the biggest sleep switches are deep in the brain. The hypothalamus runs part of the schedule, including a tiny region called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That name is too long for something so small. In human terms, it is the clock that listens to light. Light enters the eyes, not just for sight, but for timing. Special retinal cells send signals about brightness to the clock. Then the clock tells other systems what hour it thinks it is. If you give it bright light at night, it gets confused. It starts insisting the party is still happening, even if your body is begging for a chair. Melatonin is part of this messaging, released by the pineal gland. When darkness wins, melatonin does not smash you into sleep like a hammer. It leans close and suggests, gently, that now would be a good time to stop being impressive. And underneath that suggestion, other chemicals shift too. Histamine, the wake-promoting chemical in the brain, drops during sleep. Orexin, also called hypocretin, helps stabilize wakefulness, and its failure can lead to narcolepsy. In human terms, orexin is the glue that keeps the awake state from falling apart. When it is missing, the boundary between wake and dream gets leaky. People with narcolepsy can fall asleep suddenly or slip into dream paralysis while still aware. It is a reminder that your normal consciousness is not guaranteed. It is a negotiated truce, signed every morning and sometimes revoked. As the night deepens, your brain waves shift in patterns you could measure with electrodes. Electroencephalography is the technical term reading collective rhythms from the scalp. In light sleep, you see theta waves, slower, like a boat rocking. In deep sleep, you see delta waves, very slow, heavy, like ocean swells. And in rapid eye movement sleep, the pattern looks more like wakefulness again, active and busy. This is why rapid eye movement sleep feels vivid. The cortex is lit up, but the output to muscles is mostly blocked. Atonia is enforced by brainstem circuits that inhibit motor neurons. In human terms, your brain tells your body, absolutely not. You will not be running in the hallway tonight. Except sometimes the lock fails a little. Sleepwalking can occur in deep sleep, not rapid eye movement sleep, when arousal is partial and confused. The person is moving, but not fully conscious, like a house with only the kitchen lights on. Dream enactment, in contrast, can happen when rapid eye movement atonia fails, called rapid eye movement sleep behavior disorder. Then the body moves with dream content because the safety feature is broken. It can be an early sign of neurodegenerative disease in some cases. The body leaks information ahead of time, if you know how to watch. But for most nights, the system holds, and while the brain cycles through these stages, it is also changing the way it responds to stress. The amygdala, involved in threat detection, can be highly active in rapid eye movement sleep. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the rational moderator, is less engaged, so emotion can run hot while logic takes a nap. This is why dreams can feel urgent and convincing. They are stories written with fewer editors. Some researchers think dreaming helps process emotional memories, not by erasing them, but by refiling them in a calmer context. In human terms, it is like taking a sharp photograph and turning down the contrast. You do not forget. You just feel it less like a fresh wound. Now let your perspective slide deeper, away from the big picture. You are going to become something small and automatic. You are going to become a molecule of adenosine. All day, as neurons spend energy, adenosine builds in the brain. It binds to receptors and increases sleep pressure, making wakefulness feel heavier. It is the body's way of counting hours without a clock. Caffeine blocks those receptors, fitting into the same slots without activating them. It is not giving you energy. It is hiding the tired message. Eventually, the message gets loud enough to find another way through. That is why late caffeine feels like borrowing time at interest. At night, as you sleep, adenosine levels drop. The pressure eases, and the brain becomes more willing to wake later. But stress can interfere because stress chemicals are not polite. Cortisol and adrenaline can keep arousal systems activated. Even if your body is still, your chemistry can insist you're being chased. This is why anxiety feels like motion without movement. Your heart rate rises, your muscles hold tension, your stomach tightens. It is the ancient emergency program running on modern problems. The good news is that the emergency program is physical. That means it can be influenced by physical cues. Warmth, darkness, steady sound, and safety all push the balance toward repair mode. Parasympathetic activity increases, sympathetic activity decreases if you give it time. In human terms, your body starts believing you might survive the night, and that belief changes everything. Now, drift down from the brain to the slow chemistry beneath it. Hormones move through blood like letters sent by a tired postal service. They are slower than nerve signals, but they reach farther, and they linger like perfume in a closed room. When melatonin rises, it nudges many tissues, not just the brain. Body temperature shifts, digestion changes pace, immune function adjusts. There is no single sleep switch. It is a whole organism changing stance, like a city lowering its lights. One of the major nighttime patterns involves insulin and glucose handling. At night, in sleep, the body is less prepared for large meals. Late heavy food can fragment sleep because digestion is work. Blood flow shifts to the gut, hormones rise, acid production continues. The stomach is not impressed by your midnight ambitions. Even your intestines have their own nervous system. The enteric nervous system has so many neurons, it is sometimes called a second brain. In human terms, your gut can run basic operations without asking your head. It coordinates peristalsis, secretion, local blood flow, and immune responses. And it listens to stress, because stress changes gut motility. That is why nerves can feel like nausea, or cramping, or sudden urgency. You do not just think stress, you digest it. The vagus nerve is one of the main lines between brain and gut. It carries signals both ways, sensation upward, control downward. Slow breathing can influence vagal tone, shifting the body toward calm. Not because breath is magic, but because the wiring is real. In the 19th century, people did not talk about vagal tone. They talked about nerves. They said someone had delicate nerves or a nervous constitution. They were noticing the same biology without the labels. Now you can move through the bloodstream again, but not as a red cell this time. You are a hormone molecule drifting in plasma looking for your receptor. You pass albumin, the common carrier protein, keeping fluid in vessels by osmotic pressure. You pass globulins, immune proteins, some waiting, some already busy. You pass electrolytes, sodium and chloride and potassium, the salts that make everything possible. Your journey is slow compared to a nerve impulse. But slow does not mean weak. Hormones can change gene expression, shifting which proteins a cell makes. That is long-term influence, the kind that can remodel the body over time. Thyroid hormone, for example, adjusts metabolic rate. Cortisol influences glucose availability and immune function. Sex hormones alter tissues across puberty and adulthood. It is all chemistry, but it becomes identity. And at night, the chemistry of calm is partly the chemistry of letting go. Serotonin and norepinephrine systems change their firing. During rapid eye movement sleep, norepinephrine activity is very low. That is one reason the outside world feels far away in dreams. Your stress transmitter steps back and the dream world steps forward. But the immune system does not fully sleep. It changes gear. Some immune activity increases at night, which may be one reason sleep helps recovery from illness. Cytokines, immune signaling molecules, have rhythms too. Inflammation and repair are not constant. They are scheduled. If you miss sleep, you distort the schedule. Over time, chronic sleep loss is associated with higher inflammation markers. In human terms, sleep deprivation makes the body act like something is wrong. Because something is wrong. Now widen out again, back to the city. Because bodies do not exist alone. Victorian London, or Manchester, or any dense industrial city was a machine made of people and pipes. And pipes do not forgive mistakes. While your body settles into rhythms, the world outside keeps moving. Water through mains, waste through drains. Clean water was never glamorous. It did not arrive with a parade. It arrived with fewer funerals. Victorian cities learned slowly that water could be a delivery system for disease. Not because water is sinister, but because water is shared. If you contaminate the source, you contaminate everyone downstream. Before germ theory was widely accepted, many people blamed bad smells. Miasma felt intuitive because smell and sickness often arrived together. Sewers stank and outbreaks happened. So the mind drew a line. The line was not entirely irrational. Smell indicated filth, and filth correlated with contamination. They were wrong about the mechanism, but right about the neighborhood. One of the most famous pivots came from a man named John Snow. Not the one with swords and dramatic lighting. This John Snow carried maps and patience. During a cholera outbreak in London in the 1850s, he traced cases around a public water pump on Broad Street. He noticed clusters, patterns, the geometry of grief. He argued that contaminated water, not air, was the cause. He persuaded officials to remove the pump handle. Cholera cases dropped. It was not a perfect experiment, but it was persuasive. The city did not instantly become clean. Cities rarely change instantly. But the idea took root that prevention could be engineered. Sewage systems became less about comfort and more about stopping invisible sickness. Victorian engineers built networks of sewers to carry waste away from streets and water sources. They used gravity where possible, because gravity is cheap labor. They built intercepting sewers to prevent waste from entering certain parts of rivers. They built pumping stations where the land refused to slope properly. A pump is a way of arguing with gravity, using coal and metal and noise. You can imagine those pumping stations at night. Great iron beams moving up and down, steam hissing, brick buildings vibrating. It is industrial heart tissue outside the body, and the goal is simple. Move waste away, bring clean water in. But water itself needs treatment. Filtration is one of the oldest methods. Slow sand filters, for example, let water pass through layers of sand and gravel. Particles get trapped. Microbes can be reduced, partly by physical removal, partly by biological layers that form in the sand. That biological layer is called a Schmutzdecke in some contexts. It is a wonderful word for a slimy film that helps clean water. In human terms, even your filter grows a living skin. Boiling is another simple method. Heat kills many pathogens by denaturing proteins and disrupting membranes. You do not need to know microbiology to understand boiling. You only need to know that living things do not like being cooked. But boiling requires fuel, time, and containers. It is easier for those who can afford it. And then there is chlorination. Chlorine in water reacts to form hypochlorous acid, which is effective at killing microbes. It damages cell walls, disrupts enzymes, ruins the inner machinery. Chlorinated water smells like a public pool. It is not romantic. It is effective. The trick is dosing enough to disinfect, not so much that it becomes irritating. Water treatment is careful boredom. Sedimentation lets heavy particles settle out. Coagulation and flocculation help small particles clump so they can be removed. Filtration catches what remains. Disinfection finishes the job, reducing microbial risk. Then distribution brings it to homes through pipes that must stay intact. A crack in a pipe can let contaminants in if pressure drops. Maintenance matters more than speeches, and Victorian water systems were not always well maintained. Leaky pipes, cross connections, old lead lines. All of it had consequences. Lead deserves a quiet mention because it is an old poison in polite clothing. Lead pipes were used because lead is soft and workable. It also dissolves into water, especially if the water is acidic or low in minerals. Chronic lead exposure harms the nervous system, especially in children. It can impair development, cognition, behavior. In human terms, the pipe itself can steal the future. Modern systems often adjust water chemistry to reduce lead leaching. They use corrosion control, adding compounds that form protective layers inside pipes. Again, boring chemistry, huge consequences. Public health is often boring on purpose. The goal is a normal day with nothing dramatic happening. No outbreak headlines, no frantic funerals, no streets full of grief. A quiet glass of water that does not kill you is a triumph. Now, while you are still in this city of pipes, notice how much depends on pressure. Water towers, elevated reservoirs, pumping stations, all creating enough head pressure to push water through miles of distribution. Head pressure is just gravity and height. In human terms, water behaves better when it is slightly above you. Sewers also depend on gradients. A small slope is enough if the pipe is sized correctly and flow is regular. Too flat and solids settle. Too steep and water outruns solids, leaving blockages. You can design a whole system wrong by being a little lazy with angles. Victorian sewer design had to balance all of this with limited surveying tools and a city already built. Retrofitting is always harder than planning. It is surgery on a living organism. And people complain about the noise even when the noise is saving them. Now let your attention slip to the other half of sanitation. Not pipes, but hands. Soap, a small bar, humble, sometimes harsh, often scented to hide what it cannot fix. Soap works because it is amphiphilic. That means one end likes water and the other end likes oil. In human terms, it is a diplomat between grease and rinsing. Many microbes and grime cling to oily films on skin. Water alone struggles to lift them. Soap molecules surround oils and form micelles, little spheres that trap the grease inside. Then water can carry the whole mess away. Soap also disrupts lipid membranes, which matters for many viruses. A virus with a lipid envelope can be pulled apart by soap like a cheap jacket in a storm. Hand washing is not moral virtue. It is surface chemistry. And when Victorian medicine slowly adopted antisepsis, it was revolutionary in its plainness. Ignaz Semmelweis, for example, noticed that hand washing reduced puerperal fever in maternity wards. Doctors went from autopsies to childbirth without washing hands because they did not yet fear microbes. They feared insult more than bacteria. Semmelweis asked them to wash with chlorinated lime. Deaths dropped, he was mocked, resisted, and suffered for it. Because humans do not enjoy being told they are the contamination. Joseph Lister later used carbolic acid, phenol, to reduce surgical infections. Antiseptic technique began to take hold, not quickly, not smoothly, but it spread. Because it worked, and because eventually the evidence becomes too heavy to ignore. This is how science often moves, not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow collapse of denial. And, speaking of things you cannot see, the true, small villains were never the smells. They were the invisible crowd. Microbes, bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, all living or semi-living entities sharing your space. They are on your skin right now. They are in your mouth, your gut, the folds of your nose. Most are harmless. Many are helpful. Some are opportunists, waiting for a wound, a weak immune system, a bad decision. The human body is not sterile. Sterility is for instruments, not ecosystems. Your skin microbiome competes with invaders, uses resources, makes the surface less welcoming to strangers. Your gut microbiome helps digest certain fibers, produces vitamins, trains immune responses. It also produces gas, because life is fermentation. You are not a single organism. You are a crowded apartment building, and the tenants mostly pay rent. But sometimes the wrong guest arrives. A bacterium that belongs on skin gets into blood, and it becomes dangerous. Once it is in the bloodstream, it stops being a guest and starts being a fire. Not a cinematic fire with orange light and heroic music. A chemical fire, quiet, efficient, and very hard to argue with. You can picture it as a wrong key in the wrong lock. The lock is a receptor on an immune cell. The key is a bacterial surface molecule that does not belong there. Your immune system is not offended by rudeness. It is offended by patterns. It recognizes shapes that have been trouble before. That recognition can be ancient, built into your genes, or it can be learned, stored in memory cells like a grudging diary. First comes the barrier world, the outside of you. Skin, mucous membranes, acidic secretions, and constant shedding. Your skin is a dry desert for microbes most of the time. Deserts are easier to defend than swamps. Sebum on your skin contains fatty acids, and many microbes dislike them. Sweat adds salt, and salt is not kind to delicate cells. Your stomach acid is another old trick. It is hydrochloric acid, strong enough to ruin most swallowed invaders. In human terms, your stomach is a polite restaurant with a moat of acid. But some organisms can handle it. Helicobacter pylori can live in the stomach lining. It hides in mucus and manipulates local chemistry. It can cause ulcers and increase stomach cancer risk over time. Congratulations! Even your acid pit can be rented out. Down in the intestines, the rules change again. There, you actually want microbes. They take up space, consume resources, and keep outsiders from settling. This is called colonization resistance. In human terms, a full apartment building is harder to break into. But antibiotics can clear that building like a careless eviction. Then, opportunists move in. Clostridioides difficile is one of the famous ones. It can bloom after antibiotics, producing toxins that inflame the colon. The result can be severe diarrhea, dehydration, and dangerous complications. It is a reminder that killing bacteria is not the same as restoring balance. Balance is a living thing, and it sulks when you disrupt it. Now imagine a small cut on your skin, a door you did not mean to open, a splinter, a scrape, a needle, a cracked lip in winter air. Bacteria on the surface see an opportunity. They do not celebrate. They simply follow gradients and find warm tissue. Staphylococcus aureus is a common resident on skin and noses, often harmless, occasionally ambitious. When it enters deeper tissue, it can cause boils, abscesses, cellulitis. If it enters blood, it can seed the heart valves and bones. Endocarditis is the term, infection of the heart lining or valves. In human terms, your pump gets graffiti, and the graffiti grows teeth. When bacteria enter blood, the first response is often innate immunity. Innate means fast, broad, and not picky about details. Neutrophils arrive like exhausted riot police. They follow chemical signals called chemokines. They squeeze out of vessels through gaps in capillary walls. This exit is called diapesis. In human terms, they shove through the fence because the gate is too slow. Neutrophils can engulf bacteria, a process called phagocytosis. They wrap the invader in membrane, forming a bubble inside the cell. Then they flood that bubble with enzymes and reactive chemicals. Reactive oxygen species are part of this. Your immune system uses controlled oxidation, like bleach in a dirty sink. It works, but it also damages nearby tissue. That redness, swelling, and heat of inflammation is not just misery. It is blood flow, immune traffic, and chemical warfare in progress. Macrophages come too, slower but steadier. They eat invaders, clean debris, and send messages to other immune cells. They also present antigens, bits of the invader, on their surface. Antigen presentation is a way of saying, look at this, remember it. Now the adaptive immune system starts paying attention. Adaptive means slower, specific, and capable of memory. T cells and B cells each have receptors unique to them. They are generated with random recombination, like a vast lottery of possible recognizers. Most of those recognizers will never meet their target. A few will, and those few will expand rapidly. Clonal expansion is the technical term. In human terms, one useful rumor spreads fast through a village. B cells can become plasma cells, which produce antibodies. Antibodies are proteins that bind a specific target shape. They can neutralize toxins, block viruses from entering cells, and tag bacteria for destruction. That tagging is called opsonization. It makes phagocytes more eager, like putting a bright sticker on the right package. Antibodies can also activate complement. Complement is a set of proteins in blood that can punch holes in microbes. They assemble into a membrane attack complex. In human terms, the immune system builds a tiny drill, then uses it. Complement also acts as a signal, attracting more immune cells. It amplifies. The immune system loves amplification because microbes reproduce quickly, but amplification has a cost. Sepsis is one of the costs. Sepsis is not simply infection. It is a dysregulated body-wide response to infection. The immune system releases signals that change blood vessel tone and permeability. Vessels can become leaky, pressure can drop, organs can be underperfused. Inflammation becomes systemic, like a fire alarm that triggers sprinklers everywhere. The sprinklers do not ask which room is burning. In severe sepsis, clotting can go strange. Microclots can form, consuming clotting factors, while bleeding risk increases elsewhere. It is called disseminated intravascular coagulation, a long name for a short disaster. The body tries to trap invaders in clots, but if the trap spreads everywhere, it traps you too. Victorian medicine saw sepsis often, but described it differently. They used words like putrid fever, blood poisoning. They smelled infection, and that smell was real. Some bacteria produce foul compounds as they break down tissue, but the true danger was not perfume. It was multiplication, toxins, and immune response spiraling out of control. Now, because you are trying to fall asleep, we will keep the horror gentle, so you can watch the immune system at a smaller scale. Zoom down into a droplet of mucus in your airway. It is warm, slightly salty, and full of trapped dust. Cilia beat in coordinated waves, pushing the mucus upward. This escalator carries debris toward the throat to be swallowed. It is called the mucociliary escalator. In human terms, your lungs have a slow janitor with many brooms. Smoke and pollution can damage cilia. Then, the escalator slows. Mucus sits longer, bacteria linger, infections become more likely. That old coal fog did not just stain buildings. It changed the interior cleaning schedule of lungs. Now imagine a virus landing on a nasal cell. Viruses are not cells. They are genetic instructions in a protein coat, sometimes wrapped in a lipid envelope stolen from a previous host. They cannot reproduce alone. They must enter a cell and hijack its machinery. In human terms, they are a flash drive that only runs in your computer. Your cell has defenses. It can sense viral genetic material in the wrong place. It releases interferons, warning signals that tell nearby cells to lock doors. Interferons change gene expression, boosting antiviral proteins. They also contribute to that sick feeling, fatigue, ache, chill. The body makes you want to rest because movement is optional. Repair is not. Fever is part of this response too. Raising temperature can slow some pathogens and speed immune reactions. It is costly though. Heat requires energy, and energy requires oxygen and fuel. That is why fever can feel like being tired in every muscle at once. Congratulations, your body makes itself uncomfortable on purpose. Now you can look at vaccines, because they are one of the quiet triumphs here. A vaccine is a rehearsal without the full catastrophe. It exposes the immune system to an antigen safely. That antigen might be a weakened pathogen, an inactivated one, a protein fragment, or it might be genetic instructions that make your cells produce a harmless piece briefly. The immune system responds, builds memory cells, and stores the pattern. So later, when the real pathogen arrives, the response is faster. More antibodies, quicker T-cell activation, less time for the invader to spread. This is why vaccines can prevent disease or reduce severity. They do not make you invincible. They shift odds, and odds are most of biology. Victorians saw an early version with smallpox inoculation and vaccination. Edward Jenner used cowpox exposure to protect against smallpox. It was not clean science by modern standards. It was observation, risk, and a willingness to try something strange. Smallpox itself was a brutal teacher. Fever, rash, pustules, scarring, and often death. If you survived, you carried the marks. The vaccine was a quieter wound, a controlled infection that trained the body. A bargain, again. Now, bring your attention back to soap, because it is still doing work. Soap does not only remove microbes, it removes the oils and dirt they cling to. It reduces the chance you will move pathogens from one surface to another. Hand hygiene matters because hands are social. They touch faces, food, doorknobs, other hands. Victorian cities learned this slowly, often through tragedy. Hospitals were once places to die in, as much as to heal. Surgery was fast because pain control was limited. Anesthesia improved that, but infection still followed. Then, antisepsis and asepsis changed the math. Sterilization of instruments, clean technique, washing, gloves, all of it feels obvious now. It was not obvious when no one could see microbes. You do not fear what you cannot imagine, unless it smells bad, apparently. Now, consider one more quiet villain that likes Victorian infrastructure. Tuberculosis. Mycobacterium tuberculosis spreads through the air in tiny droplets. Crowded housing and poor ventilation help it move. It infects lungs and can persist for years. The immune system walls it off in granulomas. A granuloma is a cluster of immune cells forming a containment structure. In human terms, it is a prison built out of living bodies. Sometimes, containment holds for a lifetime. Sometimes it fails and disease reactivates. Tuberculosis can cause chronic cough, weight loss, night sweats, blood and sputum. In the Victorian era, it was called consumption, a poetic name for a slow theft. Now, microbes are not only enemies. You carry bacteria that make vitamin K and some B vitamins. You carry microbes that break down fiber into short-chain fatty acids. Those fatty acids feed colon cells and influence immune function. Your microbiome produces metabolites that can affect mood and inflammation. This does not mean bacteria control your thoughts like puppet strings. It means your body is a consortium, and chemistry travels. Even calm can be a community project. But when the community shifts, you feel it. After illness, after antibiotics, after diet changes, after stress. Stress hormones can alter gut motility and secretions. That changes the habitat, and microbes respond. Your body and its residents negotiate constantly. Now, let us pivot to something that sounds soothing: gravity. Because gravity does not care about microbes, or sewers, or Victorian pride. Gravity is the oldest landlord, and it never reduces rent. You feel gravity right now as weight, as pressure of blanket on skin, as the mattress pushing back. It feels stable, like a promise. But you are not sitting on a still platform. You are on a planet rotating and orbiting and drifting through a galaxy. Gravity makes all that motion feel like stillness. You think you are resting. Wrong. In the strict physics sense, you are in free fall around the sun and pinned to Earth by a force you cannot turn off. On Earth, gravity gives you down. Down is not an idea, it is an acceleration. It pulls everything toward the planet's center, including you. Your inner ear has sensors that assume this pull exists. The vestibular system includes otolith organs, tiny crystals in gel. They shift with acceleration, bending hair cells. In human terms, you carry a bag of rocks in your head to tell you which way is down. Your bones are built around gravity too. Bone is living tissue, constantly remodeled. Osteoblasts build bone. Osteoclasts break it down. This balance responds to mechanical stress. When you bear weight, bone strengthens over time. When you do not, bone weakens. In space, astronauts lose bone density, not because space is cursed, because without gravity, the usual stress signals vanish. The body decides it can save material. It is always trying to be efficient. Muscles respond similarly. Use them. They stay robust. Stop using them. They atrophy. In microgravity, muscles lose strength quickly, especially postural muscles that normally fight gravity all day. Your calves and back muscles, the quiet workers of standing, in orbit, they get unemployed. Your heart changes too. On Earth, the heart must push blood upward against gravity, especially from legs back to chest. Veins have valves, and muscles help pump. In microgravity, fluids shift toward the head. Astronauts get puffy faces and thinner legs. The body senses this central fluid increase and reduces plasma volume. It thinks, too much fluid, we can dump some. Then, when astronauts return to Earth, gravity hits again. Suddenly, there is not enough volume, and standing can cause dizziness. Orthostatic intolerance is the term. In human terms, you stand up and the world tilts because your plumbing forgot gravity was a thing. Sleep in space gets strange too. There is no natural down, no pressure points in the same way. Astronauts strap into sleeping bags on walls. They can float with arms drifting. Some report dreaming differently or waking more often. The environment is loud too. Fans must run constantly to circulate air. Without convection, exhaled CO2 can form pockets. In microgravity, your breath does not rise away from your face. It lingers unless forced airflow removes it. Congratulations, even breathing needs a machine when gravity stops helping. On Earth, gravity also keeps your atmosphere attached. Gases have thermal motion, always trying to drift away. Gravity holds them mostly. Lighter gases can escape at the top over long times. Hydrogen and helium leak away most easily. Heavier gases stay unless something dramatic happens. This is why Earth keeps oxygen and nitrogen, while small bodies like the Moon cannot. Gravity is the blanket that holds air down. It also holds oceans. Without gravity, water would wander into space as vapor and ice. Planets with too little gravity struggle to keep liquid water long term. Planets with too much gravity can compress atmospheres into crushing weights. So, Earth sits in a comfortable middle. For now, comfortable meaning you can breathe without your lungs collapsing. Gravity makes pressure. Air has weight. At sea level, that weight presses on you from all sides. You do not feel crushed because your body matches the pressure internally. The pressure in your fluids pushes outward. It is equilibrium, not kindness. In a vacuum, that equilibrium fails. Water in tissues can boil at body temperature when pressure drops. This is called ebullition. In human terms, your saliva tries to become steam. Your lungs, if you held your breath, could rupture as air expands. So if you are ever foolish enough to be exposed to vacuum, you exhale. You do not try to be brave. Bravery does not change gas laws. Victorian engineers did not deal with vacuum much. They dealt with gravity in pipes constantly. A sewer is a negotiation with gravity. A water main is a negotiation with pressure. A pump is a way of buying pressure with fuel. They built systems assuming down stays down. They relied on slopes, drops, and flow. A small miscalculation could mean sewage sitting still. And still, sewage is where anaerobic bacteria throw their worst parties. Gravity also affects how buildings stand. Stone and brick are strong in compression. They stack well under weight. Victorian sewers used arches because arches move force into compression. It is structural laziness in a good way. Instead of resisting force, you redirect it. The arch lets the tunnel hold the street above. And above that street, people coughed into fog and drank water and argued about smells, all while gravity held everything in place. Now, gravity is not uniform inside you either. When you lie down, blood distribution changes. Less pooling in legs, more even return to the heart. The kidneys respond to these shifts. In the first part of the night, some people produce more urine. That is partly posture, partly hormones, partly fluid balance. Antidiuretic hormone tends to rise at night, reducing urine production. But the system varies. Age, sleep quality, medications, and health conditions change it. Again, the body is not a single switch. It is many knobs adjusted imperfectly. Your lungs also behave differently. When you lie down, the diaphragm shifts, the chest wall mechanics change. In some positions, airway resistance increases. For people with sleep apnea, gravity contributes to airway collapse. Soft tissues in throat relax, and airway can obstruct. The brain senses rising CO2, oxygen drops, and briefly wakes to reopen airway. This can happen many times per hour, fragmenting sleep. The person may not remember waking, but the body remembers. In daytime, fatigue and strain. Continuous positive airway pressure devices use gentle air pressure to keep airway open. It is plumbing again, just in the throat. Pressure can be therapeutic when anatomy is inconvenient. Now, consider the inner ear again. When you spin, fluid in semicircular canals lags behind, bending sensors. That tells your brain you are rotating. In microgravity, the usual reference point shift. Astronauts can get space motion sickness. Their brain receives mismatched signals from eyes and vestibular sensors. The brain, confused, assumes poisoning and triggers nausea. It is an old algorithm. If sensory input is inconsistent, maybe you ate something toxic, so you vomit, just in case. Congratulations! Your brain is running ancient software in a modern spacecraft. Gravity also shapes timekeeping in subtle ways. Pendulum clocks depend on gravity. Without gravity, a pendulum does not swing properly. A pendulum needs that steady downward pull, so its swing has a reliable rhythm. Take gravity away, and the pendulum becomes decorative, like a bored metronome on strike. Victorian cities trusted pendulums for clocks because gravity was the only constant they could afford. A spring clock can tick without gravity, but it still needs calibration, and it still drifts. Timekeeping is always an argument between what you want and what physics allows. And physics, like a good landlord, will happily accept your rent and still raise the price. Now think about how a Victorian engineer measured a slope for a sewer line. You are holding a level, a plumb bob, maybe a sighting tool on a tripod. All of it assumes that down is a direction you can trust. The plumb bob hangs, obedient, pointing toward Earth's center. That string is a quiet diagram of gravity, drawn for free. Without it, level is just a rumor, and pipes become modern art. The sewer needs a gentle gradient, not too flat, not too steep. Too flat and solids settle, and the tunnel becomes a museum of mistakes. Too steep, and the water outruns the heavy bits, leaving them behind like unpaid baggage. So the Victorians leaned on gravity the way you lean on habit. They built the city's hidden rivers to flow without constant pumping. Because pumps break, fuel runs out, and maintenance is always someone else's problem. Gravity, at least, keeps showing up for work. But gravity is also the reason sewer gas behaves like a petty spirit. Carbon dioxide can pool low because it is heavier than air. Not dramatically heavier, but enough to matter in a still tunnel. Hydrogen sulfide is also heavier than air, and it likes to lurk. Methane is lighter than air, and it rises, looking for a ceiling to haunt. So the same brick tunnel can be layered with different dangers. High danger near the crown, different danger near your boots, and if ventilation is poor, those layers stay put, like stubborn weather indoors. You can picture a Victorian tester noticing this without the vocabulary. He walks in, feels fine, crouches to inspect a drain, and feels wrong. Not cursed, not weak, just suddenly dizzy and sour. Gravity guided him in, and gravity guided the gases into place. This is the kind of science that does not feel like discovery. It feels like learning where you can safely put your head. Now, since you are safely horizontal, gravity is doing something else for you. It is pressing you into the mattress, spreading your weight. Pressure points form where bone meets surface. Shoulder, hip, heel. That pressure slightly reduces blood flow in tiny areas, which is why you shift at night. You think you shift because you are restless. Often, you shift because tissue politely requests not being starved. Your nervous system does not say this in words. It says it in discomfort, then in movement, then in quiet again. That is gravity, having a conversation with your skin. And while gravity holds you down, it also holds your air in place. Air pressure is a gravity effect, a column of molecules stacked above you. Every breath you take is working against that pressure and using it. Your diaphragm pulls down, your chest expands, and air flows in. It flows because pressure differences always win. You inhale, and the atmosphere gives up a small portion of itself. You exhale, and you return warmed air and CO2 like a quiet tax. Now, widen out from your bed to the city again. Victorian engineers did not just fight gravity with pipes. They fought it with clean water because water wants to go down too. A contaminated well is a gravity problem because waste leaches downward. A river is a gravity problem because everything upstream arrives eventually. The city sits in its own drainage basin like a bowl, and in a bowl, whatever you pour in does not forget. So sanitation became a slow lesson in where things travel when you stop watching. It is not an inspiring lesson, but it is the kind that keeps you alive. Now, let the city's noise fade to something softer. You are walking beside a Victorian waterworks at night, not the grand civic building above ground, but the functional heart beneath. Pipes hum faintly with flow, and valves clunk when turned. There is a smell of damp stone, iron, and cold water. A pump house nearby exhales steam in tired bursts, and everything is designed around one simple idea. Keep the clean stream separate from the dirty one. That separation is the real miracle, because nature does not separate them for you. Nature mixes, blends, diffuses, and reuses. If you want clean water, you have to enforce it, like a strict border. And that border fails in small, boring ways. A cracked pipe, a backflow event when pressure drops, a badly placed privy too close to a well, a flood that turns streets into a shared soup. Victorian cities learned that floods were not just wet. Floods were a mixing event, and mixing events are where disease enjoys itself. But humans are persistent, and pipes are teachable. Slowly, filtration improved. Slowly, sewage was intercepted and carried farther from drinking water intakes. Slowly, the death rates bent downward, like a graph finally admitting defeat. You could call that progress. You could also call it late. Now, speaking of late, there is something the Victorians did remarkably well. They kept records. They wrote down births, deaths, causes, neighborhoods, seasons. It was not glamorous, it was paperwork. And paperwork is where patterns hide until someone patient finds them. Epidemiology is the name for that patience. In human terms, it is counting the grief until it forms a shape. John Snow mapped cholera, but many others compiled tables, reports, and dull statistics. Those statistics were the first flashlight in a dark tunnel. Not a perfect flashlight, but enough to see the direction of danger. And as the city improved, another invisible crowd became harder to ignore. Not miasma, not sewer gas, but microbes quietly adapting to your interventions. Because when you build a cleaner city, you change the ecosystem. Rats move, mosquitoes shift, water sources change. Even the microbes change because selection is always watching. You add chlorine and you kill most things, but the few that survive on purpose. In a sense, they survive because they have traits that tolerate stress. Over time, the microbial world becomes a little more stubborn. This is not a reason to fear clean water. It is a reminder that life is persistent and not sentimental. Now let us drift gently into one of the quietest wars in your body, not the dramatic immune response with fever and swelling. The small daily patrol, the one you never thank. You are a neutrophil again, but calmer this time. You float in a capillary, rolling along the vessel wall. You are scanning, not with eyes, but with receptors. You are looking for chemical distress, for cytokine whispers. Most of the time, you find nothing, and you keep drifting. That is the ideal outcome. Boredom as a survival strategy. But the moment you detect trouble, you change. You slow, you stick, you flatten against the vessel lining. You squeeze between endothelial cells and enter tissue. This is not graceful, it is determined. And you do it because the body does not negotiate with infection. It contains, it kills, it cleans, and it repairs. Sometimes it overshoots, and that is when allergies happen. Allergy is the immune system reacting to the wrong thing with sincerity. Pollen arrives, harmless in intent, and the body declares war. Histamine is released, vessels leak, mucus increases. You sneeze, your eyes water. Your nose becomes a faucet. Congratulations, you are under siege by a plant's love letter. Victorians had hay fever too, and they noticed it was seasonal. They blamed flowers, or nerves, or city life, depending on mood. They were close enough, and the immune system did the rest. Now, another kind of immune confusion is autoimmunity. That is when your defenses recognize your own tissues as targets. It is as intimate as betrayal gets, and as unromantic as biology allows. Multiple sclerosis involves immune attack on myelin in the nervous system. Type 1 diabetes involves immune destruction of insulin-producing cells. Rheumatoid arthritis targets joints with chronic inflammation. These are not moral failures. They are pattern recognition gone wrong. A guard dog biting the owner. The immune system is powerful, and power is always risky. That risk is the price of not being overrun by microbes. Now, you might wonder why this belongs in a Victorian story. Because the Victorian era was when people began to realize the enemy was small. they shifted from blaming air quality alone to blaming organisms. Germ theory did not arrive like a single thunderclap. It arrived like paperwork, microscopes, and stubborn arguments. Louis Pasteur showed microbes were involved in fermentation and spoilage. He helped bury the idea of spontaneous generation, not with insult, but with careful experiments. You can picture the swan neck flasks, curved glass that let air in, but trapped dust. Broth stayed clear when dust stayed out. Life did not appear from nothing. It arrived carried on particles. In human terms, the soup stayed soup until something dirty touched it. Robert Koch later set out criteria linking specific microbes to specific diseases. Koch's postulates were not perfect for every pathogen, but they were a scaffolding for modern microbiology. They gave medicine a new kind of certainty, conditional and testable, and that certainty changed sewers, surgery, waterworks, and ordinary habits. Now, shift back to something vast and steady again. Gravity is still here, holding your bed to the floor, but time is here too, doing its quieter work. Time is not a thing you can touch, but you can see its fingerprints everywhere. On iron, time becomes rust, orange and flaky. On wood, time becomes rot, soft and fragrant. On stone, time becomes a rounding of edges, a slow surrender. On bodies, time becomes repair, then scar, then wear. Victorian cities were obsessed with progress, but time treated them like everyone else. Bricks cracked, pipes corroded, mortar crumbled. Sewer gases ate at metal, especially where moisture condensed. Hydrogen sulfide can oxidize to sulfuric acid in damp spaces. That acid attacks concrete and mortar, weakening structures. Modern sewer systems still deal with this problem. It is called crown corrosion because it often happens near the top of pipes. In human terms, even the ceiling of a tunnel can be quietly digested by chemistry. The city fights back with linings, coatings, ventilation, and maintenance. Again, boring work, huge consequences. This is the real rhythm of civilization, not speeches, but repairs. Now, while the city ages, your body ages too, but with more style. Not graceful style, just biological style. Constant turnover. Your gut lining renews itself every few days. Skin cells shed and replace in weeks. Red blood cells cycle in months. Bone remodels over years. You are not the same material you were last year. You are a process that remembers being a person. And tonight, while you sleep, the process keeps working. DNA repair enzymes patrol for damage. Proteins get folded, refolded, or chopped up if misfolded. Cells recycle parts through autophagy, a kind of self-eating that keeps things tidy. Autophagy sounds like horror, but it is mostly housekeeping. In human terms, you take out your own cellular trash before it rots. Oxidative damage accumulates slowly anyway. Metabolism produces reactive oxygen species, little chemical sparks. Antioxidant systems catch many of them. Some slip through and nick DNA, proteins, membranes. This is part of aging, not the only part, but a steady contributor. Time is, among other things, the sum of small chemical insults. Victorians saw aging as character, as wisdom, as decline. Biology sees aging as entropy with paperwork. Now, entropy is a word people use like it is mystical. It is not mystical. It is bookkeeping. It describes how energy spreads out, how systems tend toward disorder. A hot object cools, heat flows into the room. A drop of ink spreads in water. A clean surface gets dirty over time because dust is patient. Life fights this locally by burning energy. You maintain order in your body by eating fuel and releasing waste heat. You are a warm island of organization in a cold sea of tendency. Congratulations, you are a temporary rebellion against physics. But rebellion requires constant funding. So when you sleep, you are not shutting down. You are reallocating budget. Less spent on movement and attention. More spent on repair, immune recalibration, memory processing. The city does something similar at night. Less traffic, more maintenance crews, more sweeping, more pipe checks, more quiet work below street level. And the sewer, that old brick throat, keeps doing its job, even when everyone is pretending not to think about it. Now let your mind return briefly to the Victorian obsession with smell. Miasma theory was wrong about microbes, but it shaped public works anyway. People wanted to remove foul odors because foul odors felt like danger. They ventilated, drained, flushed, and moved waste away. Those actions reduced disease even before the mechanism was understood. This is one of science's awkward truths. You can do the right thing for the wrong reason and still benefit. You can also do the wrong thing for the right-sounding reason and suffer. The difference is evidence, eventually. Evidence is slow and stubborn and unemotional, like gravity, but written down. Now consider how Victorian homes handled waste before modern plumbing. Chamber pots, privies, cesspits, waste collected close to living spaces because disposal was labor. Night soil men emptied pits and hauled it away. Sometimes it was used as fertilizer, sometimes dumped, sometimes sold. It was a nutrient cycle, messy and practical. When cities grew, the volume outpaced the system. Waste built up faster than it could be removed, so streets and courtyards became contaminated landscapes. And then rain came and carried that contamination into wells and rivers. You can see the chain step by step without meeting fear. Just flow. Water flows downhill, carrying what it touches. People drink water because they must. Microbes ride along because they can. The body responds, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And this is why clean water is such a quiet triumph. It breaks that chain with engineering and maintenance. Not perfectly, but enough to change history. Now, while we are here, there's another Victorian problem that still echoes. Lead, again, not just in pipes, but in paint and industry. Lead was used in paints for its durability and bright color. It made walls cheerful, while quietly poisoning children. Lead dust can be inhaled or ingested. In the body, lead interferes with enzymes and disrupts nervous system development. It can also affect heme synthesis, contributing to anemia. In human terms, it sabotages both the brain and the blood. The tragedy is that lead poisoning often looks like behavior problems, learning difficulties, irritability, not a dramatic collapse, but a life made harder. Victorian science did not fully grasp this at first. They had clues, painter's colic, neurological symptoms in workers, occupational hazards were often treated as personal weakness because blaming workers is cheaper than fixing factories. Some reforms came slowly as evidence accumulated. Again, the pattern repeats: denial, debate, committees, and finally action. Now let time keep moving forward, as it always does. The Victorian era gives way to modern sanitation, modern air regulations, modern medicine. But the underlying physics does not change. Gases still diffuse, water still carries contaminants, microbes still evolve, gravity still pulls, and time still turns everything into maintenance. Now, drift into a quieter, smaller example of time. You are holding an iron nail in your hand, fresh forged. It is smooth, dark, and slightly oily. Leave it in damp air, and oxygen begins to react with iron. Water helps ions move, speeding the reaction. Rust forms, iron oxide, flaky and porous. Rust does not protect the metal well. It exposes more surface, so corrosion continues, deeper, until the nail weakens. That is time in chemistry clothing. Victorian infrastructure faced this constantly. Cast iron pipes corroded, joints leaked, valves seized. They used tar coatings, improved alloys, and replaced what failed. Your body faces corrosion too, just with different materials. You do not rust, but you oxidize in small ways. Lipids in membranes can be peroxidized. Proteins can be carbonylated. DNA can be damaged by reactive species. So, you run repair systems constantly, like a city running maintenance crews, and sleep is when some of that work becomes easier. Not because the world is kinder, but because you stop spending energy on performance. Now, let us talk about decay in a way that is oddly comforting. Decay is not only destruction, decay is recycling. When a leaf falls, fungi and bacteria break it down. They release nutrients back to soil: nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon. Those nutrients feed new growth. In a sewer, decay happens too, just less poetically. Organic waste breaks down, gases form, heat is released. The system is alive with microbial metabolism. The smell is the signature of that process. Victorians tried to remove the smell because it offended. Modern systems still try, but also for safety. Ventilation reduces explosive methane buildup. Scrubbers and biofilters can reduce odor compounds. Safety rules exist because chemistry does not care about tradition. Now, think about one more quiet piece of Victorian science: the idea that you can reduce disease by changing the environment, not by curing each person individually, but by altering shared conditions. This is called public health, and it is deeply unromantic. It is sewers, clean water, vaccination, housing, nutrition, air quality. It is the reason you can drink from a tap in many places without fear. It is the reason epidemics are less frequent in some regions. It is also invisible when it works. That invisibility is its curse, because people forget what it prevents. You only notice the sewer when it fails. You only notice clean water when it is gone. You only notice vaccines when disease returns. And time again